Howdy everybody! Today we're going to be doing a swipe painting. It's a really fun technique that always turns out really good. The paints we're using are a little more expensive, but it's well worth the investment. I think you guys are going to like this one. Let's get down to the canvas. Alright, let's take a look at the colors I'm going to use for this painting. First up is permanent black. Then we have some cobalt blue. Next up is ultramarine. And some rose bright red, and some light magenta, and last but not least, some titanium white. All these paints are the Master's Touch Fine Art Studio brand. The camera was having trouble focusing at the beginning of this video, but I promise you it'll go away in just a couple minutes, so stick with me here. Let's talk about this paint. For the cells, I'm going to be using this coconut milk hair serum, about 1 pump in each cup except for the black. And then of course some Flotrol in there, it's a 1:1 ratio with the paint. And some water just to make it to the right consistency. Alright, let's get painting. For some reason, my hands just gravitated towards the black, and I almost messed up this whole thing by starting with it. Caught myself right away though, and we moved on to the real starting color, which is the cobalt blue. I'm going to pour 2 lines across the canvas of this, and at the very end I'm going to add some black in between them, but we're going to wait for that. I want to make sure I'm getting out as much as I possibly can, so I'm going to go in there with this palette knife. I really like using a palette knife instead of a popsicle stick because I can wash this off and reuse it over and over and over again instead of popsicle sticks, which tend to have a very short life. Once I'm all done with that color, I'll just wipe this off on some paper towel and I can use it again. And now that that's clean, we can move on to our ultramarine. I'm just going to add a thin line on the top and all the rest of it onto the bottom. And I'm going to make sure I get all of it out of that little tiny baby cup. I'm going to wipe off the palette knife and move on to the rose bright red. I honestly would never choose to put these colors together, but I wanted to see how this painting would turn out if I used all paints from one brand, and this happened to be the brand I had the most colors from, so that's how we ended up with this palette. An added bonus of using the palette knife is it's easier to grip, and if you need to move the paint around, like so, then you can. It's really easy. And once I'm done with the red, I'm going to move on to the light magenta. I'm just making a really thin line at the very top, and the rest of it is going down on the lower half of the canvas. Which I guess could also be the upper half of the canvas depending on how you're looking at it. It's abstract art, so whichever way you want, really. And once again, last but certainly not least, is the titanium white, which will go at the bottom/top of our canvas. At first glance, it looks like I've really underestimated how much paint I'm going to need for this canvas, but you'll see that I kind of have a way where I can get away with using less paint and wasting less paint and still getting really good results. And for starters, I'm going to make sure that all the paint is touching each other. Instead of pouring a bunch on and tipping it off the canvas, I'm going to kind of stretch out the paint with my palette knife, making sure that all of these lines run right up into each other and there's no canvas showing between them. And when I'm going between colors, I just use that color that's on the palette knife to kind of wipe along the sides to fill in the sides as well. This saves so much paint in the long run, and I'm really glad that I do it this way instead of wasting a lot of paint. Since you're not really going to see this anyway, it doesn't need to look pretty, it doesn't need to be 100% separate from each line. As long as there's no canvas showing through and each color lines up with each other, then you are Gucci, you are golden, and it'll work out perfectly. It might take a little while to get all those spots covered, but it's definitely worth it for how much paint you're going to save. And once I get all those lines all the way together, I'm going to do one last thing by spreading out that light blue, because if I was to fill this entire white area up with black, the painting would just be black. There would be no color. You want to make sure there's not a ton of swipe color on there because it'll overwhelm your painting. I'm just going to touch up the sides a little bit. They don't have to be entirely covered because we'll take care of that later. The last thing I poured on this canvas was the black, which I unfortunately lost the footage for. So we're going to go straight into the swipe. Just using an old card, and I'm making sure that the paint has full contact with the card and really lightly dragging it through. It looks really black at first, but it's really easy to drag it through again to get rid of some of that black, and I know that a lot of cells will start popping up, so I'm not super worried about it. And you can see that I used some of the black on that card to cover up the edge, so there was no need to pour all that paint off the canvas because I can use it in the long run, and this won't make a difference in the final product. You won't even notice that I didn't pour that original paint off. I'm super excited because I can already see some really cool cells popping up. Those pinks and reds and blues are all working together in a really neat way, and I'm happy with this color combination so far. In hindsight, I would have done the larger side first and done the smaller side of the swipe second, but it didn't make a huge difference, so I'm not super worried about it. Just something to remember for next time. I'm going to take you guys back up to a top view, and unfortunately I already started the swipe before I turned on my camera. As you can see, the lacing is really cool. It's harder to see from this angle, but the cells are popping up and they look awesome. One thing that I'm noticing that I'm not super happy with is you can see really well each section that I'm doing, and I'll go back in a minute and show you guys how I fixed that so it doesn't look like I did this section by section quite as much. I'd also really love to try this pour again with a better swiping tool. The card worked, but it wasn't particularly ideal for this. After looking at it, I didn't like those sections. I'm going to use a palette knife to kind of go back in and do some little mini swipes to try and make it look like I didn't do this section by section for the swipe. It'll also help to get rid of any paint puddles that are happening in between the sections of them. It's still looking a little bit chunky, but it definitely looks better to me than before I used the palette knife on it. And then I'm just going to reach over and use any paint that's fallen off to cover those edges. It's a really good way to save paint again, and you can't even tell with the final product that you didn't chip it off the edge. One thing that you want to make sure is that you're not using white paint in a really dark area on the sides. You'll notice that I'm using that white drip in the areas where white paint is on the canvas. And then when I need to go back and do the sides where dark paint is, I will use the dark paint for it. I'm doing a couple more swipes where I see puddles of paint to make sure that they won't crack or cause crazing. And I accidentally pressed down a little too hard right there and drug that light blue along, but it actually ended up looking really cool, and you'll see that in the final product. My boyfriend saw this swipe and he said it reminded him of the blood kelp in Subnautica. I haven't made it to that region of the map yet, so I can't judge it on that standard, but let me know what you guys think this swipe looks like or what it reminds you of. One more swipe and I think we're all done swiping for this painting. I'm loving how it's looking with the colors and the cells. Let's go a little bit closer to check it out. You can see the colors really held their own and the blues and the reds didn't meld together. I'm just going to do a quick little torch to get some of the bubbles out that have appeared, and maybe a couple cells will pop up. Probably not though. Part of the reason why the reds and the blues didn't meld together is because this paint is actually really thick, and you can see that how the light is shining off of it. There are craters and divots and stuff where the silicone is, and that just goes to show how thick this paint really is. And we're just going to get a nice up close shot of this beautiful lacing and these little cells that have popped up. I think it turned out really, really cool. And here is our final painting, nice and dry. It looks really glossy because of the paint quality, and I love the gradients. Cells have held their own. There's a couple spots that look a little weird, but I can live with that. If you guys like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.